All right, guys, welcome back to the Hoops Nerd postgame show. Today, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's next for the Utah Jazz. Right now, everyone's just in a holding pattern, waiting for the league to get back. There's not really a clear answer about when it's coming back, because I do think that it'll eventually return. In what way, shape, or form, I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about that at some point. But what's the next steps for the Utah Jazz? First off, they're going to have to play together. Whatever is going on between Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, the only hope that Jazz fans really have is that they figure it out and play together this season. My guess is the Jazz will do well in the playoffs, because once the competitive nature of the playoffs happens, we know what Donovan Mitchell can do in the playoffs, and we know what Rudy Gobert can do in the playoffs. Obviously, there's been some matchups that have been kind of an issue for Utah in the playoffs, especially with Houston. I don't think it's a little overblown how Rudy Gobert struggles against the Houston Rockets. It's interesting this season with how the Houston Rockets have changed their style of play, where they've taken out a center completely. And so in some ways, it's nice for the Jazz the way things have kind of worked out in a weird way. It's kind of been nice. Let's say the playoffs let's say they come back in June. Maybe they come back in June and say, hey, we're going to just play the playoffs with the standings as they are. And that would put the Jazz against the Thunder, the first round of the playoffs. It's actually an amazing draw for them with home court advantage, because I believe they're in the 4th seed at this moment. And that would be perfect. Rudy Gobert knows how to play against Steven Adams, and they will do well. And that's actually a draw that you could see things go really well for Utah. What is going to happen is Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert are going to go in and play their best ball. Rudy Gobert is going to prove his value and show that he is worth a max contract and play really well. All you can hope for Utah is that they just come and play well together. And I think they will. Honestly, I think they will. And this team has all the pieces to do well. So when it comes down to playoff time and they're doing their best to win the game, they're going to do it, and they're going to do what it takes to win. Playoff stats don't matter for contracts. Contracts come from season stats. So if Rudy Gobert is looking for points and all these things to build his resume, what's done is done. And so in the playoffs, he's going to do what it takes to win. He's got an image thing to kind of overcome, I guess. So when they come back, Rudy Gobert is just going to come out and play basketball. And who knows? Maybe this does something to him, in that he's going to be able to just be like, you know what, maybe I will just let this be Donovan Mitchell's team. Who knows? There is a scenario where that happens. And maybe this time off for them will let them cool off and figure it out. As Jazz fans, that's all you can hope. But what I think will happen is they'll come back, they will play the playoffs, and Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell will play very well, because they are both all-star caliber players. We've seen Rudy Gobert this season, and it's kind of something to talk about a little bit is that he was literally not trying very hard for a month and a half to prove a point. And the Jazz were terrible in that span. If anyone has questions about how good Rudy Gobert is, look at what the Jazz team is when he's not putting in his best effort, because it's not good. When Rudy Gobert is giving 100% and going all out to win games, they beat playoff teams like Westbrook and Paul George. And Rudy Gobert is a core piece of that. Anyone who says otherwise is just not correct, because Rudy Gobert is just so important to this makeup of this team. And so I think the Jazz actually can do really well in the playoffs and may surprise some people, especially if Houston gets knocked out and Utah doesn't have to face Houston, which honestly, it's just not fun for Jazz fans to watch Houston. Their style contradicts what Utah does so much more than it seems to with everyone else, that it would be nice to just avoid them altogether and then maybe make some noise against the Lakers. I don't know if they'll beat the Lakers, but I think this Jazz team has enough weapons and has a style that can make some noise against them. And if they're all healthy and if everyone's playing at full speed, I think they can do some damage. Do I think they'll win? Probably not. But I think if the Jazz play really well and somehow find themselves in the finals or in the Western Conference Finals against the Lakers, anything can happen. One injury, one thing can happen, and Utah can overcome that. So I actually think it'll go well. Now, beyond that, I think the Jazz are in an interesting spot, because I do not think that this thing is going to work out with Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. If I was betting on it, I wouldn't bet on it. I think the Jazz are looking at a scenario here where they've got Rudy Gobert qualified for Supermax and Donovan Mitchell, who is a younger but budding superstar, and they're just clashing, and that's a lot of money to put into someone who, for the Jazz, he works, but there might be a lot of teams out there that say, hey, I don't know if we want to trade for a Supermax player that really doesn't fit a lot of what we do in this modern NBA, blah, blah, blah. And it makes it hard to, a lot of times, guys, with contracts, you've got to think in terms of, is this a contract that's tradable? One of those contracts out there that's not very tradable is like the Chris Paul contract. As much as Thunder fans are probably enjoying this season, and I'm sure they have, that contract is just not tradable the next 2 or 3 years. Like, what happens when Chris Paul gets another hamstring pull next season, and they want to make a trade and they can't? It's tough. The same thing goes for Rudy Gobert. If you give him the Supermax, then you're planning on playing with that player for the next 4 or 5 years or whatever it is. And as Jazz fans, that's what we'd like. But if this creates a chasm with Donovan Mitchell, I don't know if you can do that. I think before the season started, I think the Jazz were more than happy to give a Supermax to Rudy Gobert. Now with all these rifts and all this locker room turmoil and all that's going on, I don't think you can do that. But I do think in a weak draft, you can trade and get up to maybe a top 5 pick. This is not your typical draft. This is a bad draft. But you could probably trade Rudy Gobert for something better. It pains me to even say those words, honestly. It seems like surreal. But we're living in a worldwide pandemic. So things are crazy right now. I don't know what's going on. Anything's different. Everything's changed. I didn't expect this a year ago, that I'd be saying these words in quarantine in my house, not being able to leave. We're living with tinfoil hats and trade possibilities for players I thought would retire on the Jazz. It's bad news, guys. It's bad news. And I said those words, but it might be a reality that the Jazz are looking at, that it's one or the other. And I think if you're the Utah Jazz, Donovan Mitchell is the future of this team. 6 or 7 years of Rudy Gobert has been fantastic. He's been nothing but a winner for the Utah Jazz, and it is a shame if the Jazz have to trade Rudy Gobert. But I will tell you this, that's what I would bet happens. And I would say there are 5 or 6 teams at the top of this draft that would say, hey, we can get a player that probably becomes a nice rotation player for us down the road. Or we can trade for Rudy Gobert, 2-time DPOY, Supermax eligible player. Probably not going to have to pay him a Supermax too, since we're trading for him. We can pay him like max level contract, but not Supermax, and have the best defensive center in the league on our team. Would you rather have that, or would you ever rather have a top 5 pick in a very weak draft, considered one of the weakest drafts ever? The Jazz can trade up and get a pick, and what they can do is, instead of have that money go out to Gobert, they can build a team around Donovan Mitchell's strengths, maybe perhaps get a top 5 pick, perhaps the number 1 pick in a bad draft. If you go look at the draft boards, it's a lot of pretty good, but not like blow your doors off. There's no Zion Williamson in this draft, guys. It's just not very good. But if you can get a top 5 pick for a player, that's pretty awesome. For Utah, that's a pretty nice consolation prize, and make up for the fact that they traded Mike Conley and they traded their first round pick and they get a better one. So I think that's probably what happens. You kind of, in a way, have 2 seasons for the Jazz that are kind of interesting, kind of exciting. You get to go to the playoffs. You'll have 2 guys that will be forced to play together. And honestly, Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, they're pros. They've been that way this whole season, despite having what is obviously some sort of frustrating situation going on. And then the Jazz might look at getting a nice pick for this player that we thought would be on the team forever, and probably will not, and it sucks. But they can get a player that can build around Donovan Mitchell, and then at that point, you let Donovan Mitchell be the guy. Let Donovan Mitchell be Dwayne Wade post Shaq. We just don't end up with a championship like Dwayne Wade got with Shaq. But Dwayne Wade went and scored like 30 points a game, was an absolute monster, perennial all-star, and probably got some MVP votes here and there, but because he wasn't on a top tier winning team during those years, didn't get MVP. But that would be fun to see Donovan Mitchell just be the star of this league and be a max player for the Jazz, build everything around him and draft guys with high talent and build around Donovan Mitchell. It's his team at that point. It sucks. It's what happened with Dwayne Wade. It's what happened with Kobe. You just have a team that's different after you lose your star big man, but it's probably what the Jazz are looking at. Guys, I don't know what else to say. These are crazy times, and these are crazy videos I'm making. Crazy. But we can like and subscribe, and we can keep going and survive this corona outbreak. Guys, like and subscribe this video. Stay in your houses. Social distance. Make sure you're doing the right thing. If you're not, stop it. Do the right thing. We'd all like to get back to normal. And the more we all do our part and stay in our houses and do the right thing and go subscribe to Donovan Mitchell, his Twitch channel, and watch that if you're missing Jazz players, because he's doing it every night. He's on with Ninja right now, it looks like. Go do all these things, but stay in your houses. Don't go out. Don't be dumb. All right, guys, like and subscribe. Talk to you later.